What if I told you that a war thousands of miles away could quietly change your grocery bill, your gas prices, your job security, and even Canada's global future? Imagine waking up to headlines that the United States has officially declared war on Iran. The Middle East is on fire, oil markets are panicking, global leaders are scrambling, and here in Canada, many people are asking one simple question. What does this mean for us? Today, we're breaking it down in a way that actually makes sense. And before we go deeper, if you care about Canada's future and how global power shifts affect your everyday life, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the Maple Doctrine now. It helps the channel grow and it keeps you ahead of the headlines instead of reacting to them. Now let's slow this down and look at the reality. Canada and the United States share the longest undefended border in the world. Our economies are deeply connected. Our security systems are linked through NORAD. So when Washington makes a move as massive as declaring war on Iran, Canada cannot simply stand on the sidelines. Even if Ottawa does not immediately commit troops, the pressure begins instantly. Political pressure, economic pressure, security pressure. The first shock would hit energy markets. Iran sits in one of the most strategically important oil regions on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway, but nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply passes through it. If conflict disrupts that flow, global oil prices could spike within days. And when oil prices rise, Canadians feel it fast. Gas stations adjust, shipping costs climb, groceries become more expensive, heating bills rise. Inflation, which many families are still struggling with, could surge again. Even though Canada is an energy producer, global pricing affects us because oil is traded internationally. Higher prices may benefit some parts of Alberta's energy sector, but for average families across Ontario, British Columbia, and Quebec, it could mean tighter budgets and more financial stress. Then comes the military question. The United States would likely ask its closest allies for support. Canada has historically stood beside America in major conflicts, from Afghanistan to coalition operations in the Middle East. But this situation would be different. Public opinion in Canada may not support another war in the region. The government would face a difficult choice: join the coalition and risk political backlash at home, or limit involvement and risk tension with Washington. Either way, it's a delicate balancing act. Canada's relationship with the U.S. is not just diplomatic, it's economic survival. More than 70% of Canadian exports go south of the border. Any strain in that relationship carries serious consequences. Security at home would also tighten. Whenever the U.S. enters a major conflict in the Middle East, intelligence agencies increase alert levels. Canada would likely boost surveillance, airport security, cyber defense, and border controls. The fear would not just be physical attacks, but cyber retaliation. Iran has advanced cyber capabilities. Canadian banks, infrastructure, and government systems could become indirect targets if they are seen as supporting U.S. operations. That means more government spending on defense and cybersecurity. Money that has to come from somewhere, possibly through higher taxes or increased national debt. But the story does not stop at economics and security. There's also the global diplomatic shift. Canada has often positioned itself as a middle power, a country that bridges gaps, promotes diplomacy, and supports multilateral institutions. A U.S.-Iran war could divide the world into competing camps. Some countries might back Washington, others might oppose it. Canada would have to carefully navigate its alliances with Europe, its trade relationships in Asia, and its commitments to NATO. If global tensions escalate further, supply chains that were already fragile after the pandemic could fracture again. That affects manufacturing, tech, automotive production, and even food supply networks here at home. There's also the domestic political effect. Wars reshape elections, they change public priorities. Suddenly, healthcare, housing, and climate policy compete with defense budgets and national security debates. Leaders are judged on crisis management, not campaign promises. If Canada sends troops or resources, the human cost becomes real. Families worry, communities debate. Veterans' issues return to the forefront. The emotional temperature of the country rises. And here's something many people don't immediately consider. Immigration patterns could shift. Conflict in the Middle East often triggers refugee flows. Canada has historically opened its doors during humanitarian crises. That decision carries both compassion and complexity. It affects housing demand, social services, and public debate. The government would need to balance humanitarian responsibility with economic realities. All of this creates uncertainty. Markets dislike uncertainty. Investors hesitate. Businesses delay expansion. That slows economic growth. A war that begins in the Persian Gulf can quietly influence hiring decisions in Toronto and construction projects in Vancouver. The ripple effect spreads further than most people imagine. In the next part, we'll go deeper into how this conflict could reshape Canada's long-term strategy, its military doctrine, and even its relationship with rising global powers like China and India. Because this isn't just about one war. It's about the future direction of Canada in a world that feels increasingly unstable. Stay with me. Now let's go deeper, because the real impact of a US-Iran war on Canada is not just about short-term gas prices or temporary political pressure. It's about long-term strategy. It's about where Canada stands in a world that is slowly dividing into power blocks again. If the United States is fully engaged in a major conflict with Iran, Washington's global focus shifts dramatically. Military assets move toward the Middle East. Diplomatic energy concentrates on coalition building. Billions of dollars are redirected into defense operations. And when America concentrates its power in one region, other regions feel the vacuum. The question for Canada becomes simple but serious. Does this create risk, or does it create opportunity? Now let's start with defense. Canada has often relied on the U.S. security umbrella. NORAD protects North American airspace. Intelligence sharing is constant. But if the U.S. military is heavily tied down overseas, Canada may feel pressure to increase its own defense capabilities faster than planned. That means higher military spending, new equipment, cyber warfare investments, Arctic surveillance upgrades. Remember, Canada's Arctic region is becoming more strategically important every year. Russia and China are increasing activity there. If Washington is distracted, Ottawa may have to step up more independently, and that changes budgets. More defense spending usually means difficult trade-offs. Money for housing, healthcare, and social programs may face new competition. Politicians will frame it as necessary for national security, but everyday Canadians may feel the tension between global conflict and domestic needs. Now let's talk about trade and global positioning. A prolonged war in the Middle East could push oil prices higher for an extended period. On one hand, Canada, as an energy producer, could benefit from increased export revenue. Alberta's oil sands sector might see renewed investment. Energy companies could expand. Jobs could grow in certain regions. But here is the other side. High global energy prices also accelerate the push toward alternative suppliers and renewables in Europe and Asia. Countries that want energy security will diversify quickly. That means Canada must decide whether to double down on traditional energy exports or invest even more aggressively in green technology and critical minerals. And that's where things get interesting. Canada holds significant reserves of lithium, nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements, materials essential for electric vehicles and advanced batteries. In a world where geopolitical conflict disrupts oil flows, countries may speed up their transition to reduce dependence on volatile regions. Canada could position itself as a stable, democratic supplier of these strategic materials. That's not just economic strategy, that's geopolitical leverage. But global alignment matters too. If the war escalates and tensions rise between the US and countries that oppose the intervention, Canada may find itself navigating complex relationships. Think about China. Think about India. Think about European nations that might have mixed reactions. Canada has trade relationships across all these regions. Being seen as automatically aligned with every US military move can complicate diplomacy elsewhere. Yet distancing too much from Washington carries its own risks. This balancing act becomes even more delicate if the conflict expands beyond Iran. If regional actors are pulled in, global markets could face prolonged instability. Shipping routes through the Middle East could remain unsafe for months. Insurance premiums for cargo could spike. That means higher costs for imported goods. Canada imports a significant amount of consumer products, electronics, and industrial components. Higher transport costs eventually hit store shelves. There's also the psychological factor. Wars change investor behavior. When global uncertainty rises, capital tends to flow toward safe havens. Canada has historically been seen as politically stable. That could attract foreign investment seeking safety. But if Canada becomes more directly involved in military operations, that perception could shift slightly. Investors analyze risk carefully. Even small changes in risk perception affect currency value, stock markets, and long-term economic growth. Another important dimension is public opinion and national identity. Canada has often defined itself as different from the United States in foreign policy tone, more diplomatic, more multilateral. If Canada joins the conflict strongly, some citizens may feel that distinction shrinking. If Canada chooses a limited role, others may argue that the country is not standing firmly with its closest ally. This debate can reshape elections and political narratives for years, and we cannot ignore the human side. Canadian families with roots in the Middle East will feel emotional impact deeply. Communities may experience tension or fear. Social cohesion becomes more important than ever. Leaders will need to speak carefully, avoiding rhetoric that divides or stigmatizes. A global war has a way of amplifying domestic sensitivities. As we move forward, the biggest question becomes this: does Canada remain primarily reactive to U.S. foreign policy, or does it use this moment to redefine its independent global role? That's not a small question, it's a historic one. And in the final part, we are going to explore possible future scenarios, from best case outcomes to worst case escalations, and what ordinary Canadians should realistically prepare for in the months ahead. Now, let's bring this to the future, because the direction this conflict takes will define Canada's next decade, not just the next few months. When a major power like the United States declares war on Iran, history shows us that outcomes rarely stay contained. The best case scenario is a short and controlled conflict with limited regional spillover. Oil markets spike temporarily, diplomacy eventually cools tensions, and the global system stabilizes within a year. In that scenario, Canada absorbs some economic shock, sees short-term inflation pressure, maybe increases defense spending slightly, but ultimately adjusts without deep structural damage. But the worst-case scenario looks very different. If the conflict spreads across the region, if other powers get involved indirectly, if global shipping routes remain unstable for a long period, the economic consequences could be heavier. Prolonged high oil prices could push inflation back to levels Canadians worked hard to escape. Interest rates might stay elevated longer. Mortgage payments could remain painful for families already stretched thin. Businesses facing higher borrowing costs could delay hiring. Youth unemployment could rise. Economic stress changes political conversations fast. There is also the possibility of cyber escalation. Modern wars are not fought only with missiles and aircraft. They are fought with code. If cyber attacks target financial systems, energy grids, or communication networks in allied countries, Canada must be ready. Even a temporary shutdown of banking systems or major infrastructure would shake public confidence. That's why cybersecurity investment becomes not just a military issue, but an everyday stability issue. Canadians may not see those defenses directly, but they matter more than ever in a digitally connected world. Another scenario involves shifting global alliances. If the war deepens divisions between Western nations and countries that oppose the intervention, the global economy could fragment further. Trade blocs may tighten internally. Sanctions could expand. Technology access could become restricted. For Canada, whose prosperity depends heavily on open trade, fragmentation is risky. We are not a closed economy. We thrive when global markets are stable and predictable. If globalization slows or reverses, Canada must adapt quickly, diversifying partnerships and strengthening domestic supply chains. And here is something many viewers may not think about right away: the impact on Canada's global reputation. In moments of crisis, countries are watched closely. How Canada responds, whether through military involvement, humanitarian aid, diplomacy, or restraint, will shape how the world views us. Are we seen as a stabilizing voice, a reliable ally, a bridge builder, or simply an extension of American strategy? That perception influences future trade deals, partnerships, and diplomatic leverage. At the same time, there is opportunity hidden inside crisis. Canada has resources the world needs: energy, critical minerals, food supply, fresh water, and political stability. In an unstable world, stability itself becomes an asset. If policymakers move strategically, Canada could strengthen its role as a secure supplier and trusted partner. That requires smart, long-term planning, not emotional reaction. It requires balancing alliance commitments with national interest. For ordinary Canadians watching this, the question becomes practical. What should you prepare for? First, expect volatility. Markets may swing. Headlines may shift daily. Avoid panic decisions based on one news cycle. Second, watch energy prices closely because they often signal broader economic shifts. Third, pay attention to government announcements about defense, taxation, and trade policy. These decisions will shape the economic environment over the next few years. Most importantly, understand that global conflict does not automatically mean national collapse. Canada has navigated world wars, financial crises, and global pandemics. Resilience is part of the national story, but resilience works best when citizens stay informed and engaged, not divided and reactive. And this is where I want to hear from you. Do you think Canada should fully support the United States if this war continues? Or should Canada take a more independent path, even if it risks tension with Washington? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and these conversations shape how we think about our country's future. If you found this breakdown helpful, share this video with someone who needs a clear, calm explanation of what's happening. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the Maple Doctrine now, because in times like this, staying informed is not optional. It's essential. We'll continue to follow this story closely, and whatever direction the world takes next, we'll break it down together.